because it is currently illegal to swim in DC waters, although they're not really. Because we've seen, I saw a woman swimming on the other side of the bridge. Serious? She was swimming laps. She was just going along, and she was waving at Trey. He was like, I saw some woman swimming over there. And he was like, hey, whatever.
Okay.
She was fine, apparently. So that is, DC is doing a lot more programs to actually prevent any kind of sewage or stormwater from getting into the river.
Now, that trail right there, or that path, where does that go?
So that's part of the trail.
Okay,
So the Anacostia River Walk Trail goes on either side. You can connect them on the bridges.
Okay.
And it runs almost the whole length of the river in both DC and go up into Bladensburg a little bit. One of the best trails and trail systems in DC. And you can connect it with a bunch of other trails in DC to go into like College Park and stuff like that. Like my cousin lives in Pickens Park over there. He and his wife went on this like literally like circumnavigated DC Park, and you rode down and everything like that. And it's very well maintained and that's always and you can pretty much, and it's nice because it's uninterrupted for the most part. One of the bonus parts about that is that, so this is the Pennsylvania Avenue Bridge here, and then we'll turn around and see the 11th Street Bridge / 695 Bridge just beyond there. So they're working on planning and going to build a solely pedestrian bridge on the 11th Street side of the bridge over there. So it's not going to be for any cars or anything like that, just going to be for bikes and people. So it's going to be an easier way for people to access either side of the river, and also access the trails from either side of the river as well. So they're going to build that bridge, hopefully done by 2023. But that's one of the big things we're excited for. It's going to allow people in the Navy Yard to access Old County Anacostia, people in Old County Anacostia to experience the Navy Yard without having to cross any of these bridges, which can be sketchy, I'll say, at times, depending on the bike lanes and everything like that. If you look to the right side of the boat at about 2 o'clock, you'll see some blue boats there on the shore. Those are actually DC water boats. So those boats go around this lower part of the river and actually skim up a lot of the trash in the lower part of the river. I like to basically say they're like gigantic river Roombas. So they go around this lower part of the river and they'll skim up trash like this. That's on the side of the river. Baltimore's Inner Harbor has a similar kind of boat. It's called Mr. Trash Wheel, if you guys have seen that. It has the same thing. A little more creative, has some googly eyes on top of it, but does the same thing and cleans up a lot of the trash in the Inner Harbor of Baltimore.
It's on YouTube.
Yeah. So to also let you guys know where you're going, if you were to continue another mile down the river to our left, you'd eventually end at the mouth of the Anacostia River. So the Anacostia River flows into the Potomac and then into the Chesapeake Bay and then into the ocean. So that's why we are advocates of doing a lot of work to clean up the river here, because then we prevent any kind of trash or any kind of pollution from flowing into the Potomac River, and then we prevent that from flowing into the Chesapeake Bay, and then we prevent that from flowing into the ocean. So if we can stop it here, we can stop it from going down there. Does anyone know where the name Anacostia River came from? No one else? Dolly knows? So it came from the First Nations, or the Native Americans, who were living along the side of the river. They actually lived where Anacostia Park is right now, and a little bit towards Capitol Hill over there. So their English version of their name was the Anacostans. They were the Anacostan Indians. Their actual tribal name is the Nacotchtank tribe, but the English call them the Anacostan Indians. So the river that the Anacostans lived along of is the Anacostia River. It was the same for the Potomac. The Potomac is named after the Potomac tribe, or the Potomac people who lived along the Potomac River. So a lot of the rivers in this Chesapeake Bay area are named after some indigenous peoples who lived here. So it's always nice to acknowledge that they were the first river stewards before we were even here. They were the first water keepers. They were the first river keepers.
There's river keepers.
If y'all ever want to explore the Anacostia a little bit more, up at Bladensburg, I think you can rent kayaks or canoes. Also down in the summertime, down towards Nats Park, you can rent kayaks and canoes. I don't think you can do canoes and kayaks. Hopefully at Kingman Island in the next couple of years, they're going to start doing rentals of kayaks and canoes, so you can explore Kingman Island and Kingman Lake, which is really, really cool to explore. You can head up in there on like a high tide, so you don't have to paddle that much. Explore around, and then on a low tide, you just take the tide all the way back out. So that's pretty nice. It is a very unique way. Yes, you can get on this boat and stuff like that, but it also is a nice way that gets you kind of closer to the environment, closer to the water. And you can go in a lot more areas that this boat can't. Like, we can't go up into Kingman Lake. You can go up towards Kenilworth Aquatic Gardens. You can actually get into some of the aquatic gardens and paddle around there a little bit, which is pretty cool. Especially during the Lotus Festival in July when all the lotuses are blooming and everything. Really, really beautiful. You can actually kayak up into them because it flows into the Anacostia River. So that's actually a really cool experience.
How many miles?
So the whole river is around 8 miles. It goes from Bladensburg, Maryland down to the mouth right there towards Haynes Point in the East Potomac Park. And around 7.5 of those miles are in D.C. So we really want to call something D.C.'s river. Everything you see here is in D.C. You don't see any part of Maryland. This is really D.C.'s river. The Potomac has the name the Nation's River. In reality, only like 0.5% of it actually flows through D.C. So I like to say this is D.C.'s river and thus the Nation's River. Obviously, I'm a bit biased, but I like to think of this as D.C.'s river. This is the Nation's River. It's also really interesting because when D.C. was first being designed as a city, I like to use this as like the first example of the Anacostia being the forgotten river. When it was first being designed as a city, the person who designed it, L'Enfant, who L'Enfant Plaza is named after, designed it with an emphasis on Bladensburg and the Anacostia River because it was a better river for trade and people, and more people lived along here. But then George Washington was the president at the time. He had a big old house in Mount Vernon in Virginia, and so all of his friends were Virginia landowners. And so then they kind of focused it more towards Georgetown and Northwest because that was the better port for them. It was closer to their houses, closer to where their crops were, all that other kind of stuff. So that was the first example of the Anacostia was meant to be the river in D.C., and it kind of got pushed to the wayside by the Potomac and stuff like that. But it's an interesting piece of D.C. history.
Very.
The 11th Street Bridge, too, so not this bridge, but back there where the 11th Street Bridge is. That was one of the first bridges actually built in D.C. Not in its current form, obviously, but in its actually where it's located in D.C. It was one of the first bridges built along D.C. That was built across a river in D.C. So before even bridges were in the Potomac, the 11th Street Bridge was one of the first bridges there. It was actually also the bridge that John Wilkes Booth fled across after he assassinated Lincoln. Just more of a D.C. interesting fact. The 11th Street Bridge, so not this bridge, but the one in the distance.
Oh, the one past it. Okay.
The Anacostia weirdly has a lot of Lincoln history associated with it. Some of the trials for the conspirators were at Fort McNair, which is on the Anacostia.
It's
Yeah, I
63.
agree with you. This is the DC nation.
I mean, the facts are there. It runs through DC. 95% of it's in DC. The Potomac comes in like by Chain Bridge and then leaves right after Columbia Island there, or Teddy Roosevelt Island. So, and the Potomac's a long river. It only flows like this much through DC.
DC. So they can have that.
Yeah. So when we come into dock here, y'all, I'm gonna have to run up this left-hand side, so just keep an eye out for that.
Okay.
Man, it's been hot and cold today. I've been taking my jacket off, putting my jacket
gosh,
back on. It's amazing. This morning I was
Freezing.
Then I took the jacket off, and then I was like, oh, I stopped moving a little bit.
I meant
put my
Monday.
jacket back
Oh,
on.
Lord.
Yeah. That's it.
Monday.
Honestly, on the Anacostia, the wind really is the thing, because you get a big push down wind from upstream, and it can get really, really cold. Sometimes the wind just stops, and it gets nice and glassy. So it is very contingent on the winds on the Anacostia. Like yesterday, it was a high tide, but the wind was blowing very, very hard this way. So on the high tide, looked like it was lower than the usual low tide. It was like where that sign is, it was like a foot below where the water is now. We're at like peak high tide. So that was like, I could like walk on the river bottom below that bridge.
And it was because of the wind pushing
Yeah, so
hard
like
this way.
all the wind we've been getting recently, it was basically just blowing all down the river. So when it blows down there, just imagine just pushing the water downstream.
No, that's a kayak.
Do you ever put on like galoshes or something and you walk down in the shallow end?
For like put on like waders and stuff like that. Yeah, we'll do that for wetlands and stuff like that.